And yeah, you saw in that video, the shoulders and the head.
After all of my analysis, I've never been able to come up with any alternative explanation other than that it's a Sasquatch observing John and Ben as they're filming it.
In 2013, brothers Jonathan and Ben Brown recorded a Sasquatch on their property with a thermal camera. This is a recall of that event.
Ben and I were sitting out here. This was on October 30th of 2013. And there was cows behind us right here. And the thing about that night, the rancher was moving some cows out. And so they were going to a different field. It was just that time of year. And so some cows were getting separated by their family. And there was a lot of bellowing and what sounded like you could only imagine cows crying. And they were making a lot of noise. Anyhow, Ben and I are sitting out here, my brother Ben and I, and we're thinking like, man, it's so loud out right now. But then there was one point where we heard this light tapping, and it was coming directly behind us. And that was when I got out the thermal camera and was looking around, and yes, there was plenty of cows around, but there was something with a human-shaped head that was laying close to the ground. And I was looking at it, and I was like, Ben, there's something on here that it's not a cow. By this point, when I'm looking at it again, it's changed positions. So behind us is a drop off where it drops off about 12, 14 feet. And so at this point, we're looking at it from a different position from the chest up. And then at that point, I'm thinking that I'm recording, then I realize that I'm not recording. And I go, hey, Ben, it's not recording. I was taking snapshots at the time. And so I hand the thermal camera over to Ben, and then that's when Ben gets it recording.
We were sitting out here. Honestly, it seemed like it was going to be a pretty boring night because instead of the cows being way down in the field, like they were right here. So every single branch cracking that we heard, it was assumed to be a cow or whatever, so I wasn't expecting really anything happening that night. Then John just decided he wanted to look through the thermal. I wasn't expecting anything, but suddenly he's like, hey, I got something here, and it's just right over there. So he was looking at it for a while. He handed it to me. I pushed record, and yeah, you saw in that video, the shoulders and the head. For the first little bit, I was just trying to figure out how this is a cow, because there were still cows walking right here. You could see that in the video too. So my mind was telling me this isn't what I'm looking at. Then John whistles at it. You can see it kind of stretch up a little bit like that. And I was like, yeah, that's not a cow doing that.
I met the Browns, Jonathan and Sarah, and Jonathan's brother Ben, back in 2015, shortly after they'd captured their thermal footage. And at the time, I was kind of known as the thermal guy. Today, everybody has thermal cameras, it seems, but not back then. I had a couple. And so I brought them over, met the Browns, and we began working together, trying to capture more thermal footage. I didn't know much about their property or the activity that they'd had historically. But I was always suspicious, and I was always trying to make something explain what they recorded. They had cattle on the property next to their house, and I would be here day and night observing the cattle Sometimes the cattle would lay down and I would circle them completely with my thermal camera, watching, looking at the cow laying there, chewing its cud, trying to take that cow image and turn it into what they recorded. But I was never able to do it. I was never able to make a cow look like the heat signature of what they recorded. In my opinion, after working with a lot of thermal videos, evaluating them, analyzing them, the heat signature in their footage is not a cow. A lot of people will say, well, a cow wouldn't just walk across in the video with a Sasquatch standing back there or laying back there on the slope. To that I'll say, well, the cow just casually walked in front of Ben and John closer than the Sasquatch was. The cow wasn't concerned about Ben and John standing there filming it. So why would the cow be concerned with the Sasquatch? The cow was simply not being concerned with whatever it was familiar with. It was familiar with Ben and John. It was apparently familiar with the Sasquatch as well. Another thing that a lot of people don't understand in that footage is that it's laying on a decline. There's a miniature cliff back there from where the floodwaters erode the bank. And when the ground comes to its chest, so you're seeing it from the chest up. And after all of my analysis, I've never been able to come up with any alternative explanation other than that it's a Sasquatch observing John and Ben as they're filming it.
We had a man by the name of Phil Poling come visit our home. Phil thinks like an investigator. He compiles the evidence and thoroughly dissects it. Here is a portion of Phil's video. The entire one can be found on his YouTube channel, which is linked in the description.
On October 30th, just prior to midnight, John Brown and his brother Ben captured thermal footage of something on their property they couldn't explain. Many believe that this shows the head, shoulders, and chest area of a large Bigfoot. Others do not. My hope is to examine and make an attempt to explain the findings. I think the first thing would be to get a better understanding as to the lay of the land and the scene. The property in question is quite rural, with forested areas that nearly circle the large tract of land. The nearest neighbor is about a half-mile away, and a large farm lays behind the property over a steep bluff. This is my copy of that footage. In watching, I was immediately struck by its appearance. It looked at first blush to be the upper half of a large person, broad at the shoulders. It was described as being on a steep hillside and standing or crouching about 3 or 4 feet down over the embankment. Also shown to me were photos, a video, and a cast made of tracks found in the area that measured just over 16 inches in length. The cast was still damp and had yet to be cleaned, so it demonstrated the substrate where it came from quite well. This was later shown to Dr. Meldrum, I believe, for further analysis. Now, the one thing I do know about this thermal is that it's of something that is hotter than the surrounding area and seems to indicate body heat. The shape of it is something that's been questioned. So if we were to remove the ridgeline, could we see the shape of something other than a person or a Bigfoot? Because of the apparent mass of the subject, I felt that a deer could easily be ruled out. Several people have commented that this could be a cow laying down, and in fact, partway through the video, we see a cow wandering past. In attempting to make some kind of comparison, I used many silhouettes of cows in different degrees of poses to resolve the question. I was unable to make any match at all. A real concern was with the ears. A cow's ears will show up on thermal very easily, and they seem to be absent from what we could only surmise as the head area of the subject. Using a bear for comparison wasn't any better, but that doesn't exclude the possibility of it being a person. But before we look at that possibility, let's have a look at the image quality. The footage was shot with a borrowed FLIR model BTS XR Pro with an attached 65mm lens that was set to 2x zoom. John and Ben had zero experience with this camera or any other FLIR camera for that matter, so it was no wonder that the subject was out of focus. Partway through the video, a cow walks past that looks to be far closer than the subject does. It also looks in focus. The outer focusing ring on the lens could have easily corrected the problem, but this wasn't known at the time. Another problem occurred when the camera unexpectedly shut off. The first attempt at size comparisons was done by David Ellis. Based upon the spot that John reported recording and the location of where the prints were found, David set up to measure height and width. That would become apparent when an overlay of him was placed over the thermal imaging. However, after this was done, it was noticed that the framework of trees and bushes did not match that of the original footage. As it turns out, the point of view and David's location was too far to the west. It would have to be redone. And it was. Going back to the location, height and width was made again in the proper location, and it was found that although it was a different spot, it still followed the same ridgeline from west to east, so the actual size didn't change for distance. Using the scale pole, the image was determined to be around 4 feet wide and 7 feet tall. Daytime photos were taken by Derek Randalls from the spot of where the footage was taken. His wife Tori is standing in. She stood further up on the hill to get a better idea for scale. Not height, but scale. You can see that the ridgeline cuts her at about the hip. She's a little hard to see because she's wearing a tan-colored coat. When fading to the thermal image, we can see that there is quite a bit of difference in the mass and girth of the subject. To get a better understanding as to its location, we need to see where it is in relation to the surrounding area. My visit to the property found Derek and Tori busy working on mapping relevant locations for distance along the field of view. The results is this chart. On the off chance that the subject was not over the ridge but on top and nearer to the camera had been considered. The camera lay at the bottom of the chart. 28 feet north, the camera is where the cow passed by. At just over 64 feet north is where the low-hanging branch cuts across the scene, and this is now outside the depth of field for the camera and begins to lose focus. Just beyond that point is a bushy area that has some scraggly low blackberries. And because of its distance and focus, it became clear that this short bush is what caused the diffusion in the heat source on the subject's left side. The subject was indicated as being just beyond the ridge and presumably standing on a narrow, well-used footpath that paralleled the upper ridge and joined up to the lower part of the cow trail to the west. The cow trail, coming from the lower pasture, is a bit steep, but not too steep that the cattle can't climb it, and it's certainly wide enough. This is the estimated angle of the cow trail, showing a Bigfoot in the location where the tracks were found and cast. But the location of the thermal image is a different story. A short drop to a narrow path, and then a sweeping steep drop beyond the path to the pasture that lays about 40 feet below. So now the thermal location makes more sense. What we are seeing is something hot that is beyond the ridge. We know this because the ridge line matches exactly from Tori to the subject. If it was something this side of the ridge line sitting on the ground, then the image would be lower in the frame and not match the line but cover it. The comparison between Tori, standing further up on the hill showing herself from the waist up, and the subject that looks like it is showing from about the chest area up is astounding. But even at that, I had to question the location. How do we know that there was anything standing near the ridgeline and not far beyond it? If nothing was blocking our view, our line of sight would continue on. My question was, without someone standing there, where would my line of sight end up? Instead of one massive creature, what if we were looking at a herd of cattle bedded down in the pasture below. So at the scene, I followed the line from the original point of view out to the ridgeline. And even before I got to the overhanging branch at 64 feet, I realized that what was visible was an area beyond the section of pasture below the ridge. What could be seen was blackberry bushes, swamp, and trees. In checking on Google Earth, this area was fenced off, so there could not have been any cows in that area at all. The image itself looks as one solid subject, only broken by the branches and bushes. Even as out of focus as it is, it's difficult to think we could match up several people to deliberately form this shape and hold it for any real length of time. I doubt if two deer or any other animal would be huddled together just over the ridge and stay for more than just a few seconds. Even if they did, I stress to find any way that they could possibly make up this shape. And it doesn't seem to have any separation points to indicate more than one subject anyway. What is also important is what led up to this event. The Browns have been experiencing activity around the area for some time, and this was also confirmed by neighbors to be something that's fairly common. Calls and other noises could be heard sometimes nightly, and it was a series of knocks that caused John and Ben to grab the thermal camera and record that night.
The following clip is by YouTube user Bigfoot Tony. Many question why the Sasquatch in the video doesn't move. Tony has stabilized the video to show otherwise. His entire video is also linked in the description.
We'll just go along slowly. There's a bit of a sort of a sway there, left to right, back and forth. There also. And moving along. Here also. So we get this kind of motion, swaying motion. Clearly some more movement going on. Up and down motion there.
This is the print that was cast from the ridge. You're getting a rough view right now of what the guys saw. We're going to walk over to the ridge where the creature was. So a lot of this has been cleared out since. We've also filled in part of the ridge where he was standing. But if you notice that this is a very steep hill and he was standing right here.
The print cast on site measures 16 inches. We have found other prints in the same size on our property, but they lack the unique bend that this print has. I believe the bend is due to the steep hill that the Sasquatch was standing on. I went through the footage frame by frame, and after 2000, I came across the moment that Jonathan whistles and the Sasquatch looks directly at the camera. Note the sagittal crest on his skull, a trait not shared by humans. The eyes, which glow hottest through a thermal, are obvious, as well as the massive pectorals, deltoids, and trapezius muscles. The clavicle bone on the Sasquatch is also clearly visible. We leave you with an audio clip from our property. Thank you for watching.